Hello students, welcome to Social Problems, Chapter 16, Population and Global Inequality. Some of the things we're going to be discussing in this lecture, we're going to talk about the global population explosion, the demographic transition theory, we're going to talk about global birth rates, global death rates, the difference between relative poverty versus absolute poverty. We'll discuss global hunger, global slavery, and then we're going to finish up talking about modernization theory and world system theory. First off, let's take a look at the global population explosion, and that's what demography is. It's the study of the human population. And here in the United States, we conduct the U.S. Census that pulls demographic information every 10 years. We did it in 2020. The next time will be in 2030. So around 12,000 years ago, there were only about 5 million people estimated on Earth. In 1 AD, it was estimated that there was 300 million people on Earth. When the Industrial Revolution came through, it really started to change the overall global population immensely, because we went from more of a rural society to more of an urban one. Medical advances and other technologies really took off, and so we saw in the year 1800 we had our first 1 billion people on the planet. 130 years later, it doubled to 2 billion. 32 years later, it increased by another billion. About 12 years later, another billion. In 1987, it went up to 5 billion, 99, 6 billion. Today, it's a little bit over 8 billion. So as you can see, the population explosion is moving very, very quickly. If we're taking a look at overall human history, as long as we've been here and how fast it's been growing since the Industrial Revolution, that's why they refer it to as the global population explosion. So of the millions of people that are born each year on the planet, the vast majority of them are being born in undeveloped or third world countries that have not experienced an industrial revolution like we have here in the United States. And you can see that from this chart here. You take a look at the red line, it shows where the world is going in regards to population. Okay, it shows that it's going up, and it's projected by the year 2050 to be somewhere between 9 and 10 billion people on the planet. But out of that trajectory, in the direction it's going, it shows in the blue that less developed countries are going to have the vast majority of those numbers of babies being born. If you look at the green line, this is going to be more industrialized, developed nations like the United States, Canada, and also Europe. As you can see, the population growth is going to be much, much slower in industrialized nations. And what this is referring to, or what can help explain this, is called the demographic transition theory. And it states that population growth tends to slow down as a country becomes more industrialized and more progressive. It starts to go from a very high birth rate and also a very high death rate due to lack of medical advances to more of a lower birth rate and also lower death rates as well, which is what we are seeing here in the United States, with birth rates going down, and also we have people living much longer today than ever before. So whenever a society goes from being an undeveloped, more third world country to an industrialized one, they have a higher standard of living, much better nutrition, better medical care. They have various forms of birth control that can be very inexpensive, if not free, to a lot of people. We have various forms of sterilization, tubal ligations for women, vasectomies for men. So this allows both men and women to have a lot more control over how many children they may or may not want to have. We have legalized abortion as well. Another trend that we see that we've talked extensively in this course is the rise of women moving into the workforce and being more driven by their career instead of having children or having a lot of children and being a stay-at-home mother. The emphasis has been more so on education, careers, and so that's why we've seen the rise of that two-income family for many decades now. So let's take a look at the global birth rates. So the birth rates are the number of births per year per 1,000 people. So in industrialized nations, the birth rates are lowering. They've been going down for many decades. And children are considered more of a psychological type of asset. It can be very expensive to have children in industrialized nations. So having children and raising children is more of a psychological asset where a lot of families, they want to have children. They want the experience of raising children. In undeveloped countries, they have a much higher birth rates. So around 83% of all the world's population are going to be concentrated in undeveloped countries and continents like Africa, where they may have a lot of limitations in regards to the access to birth control. But also in those countries, children are seen as more of an economic asset. The more children that they have, the more hands they have to work. And the more children they have, they can also help out around the house, they can help out with the work, and they can also help out with the senior citizens or the elderly family members that need assistance. So it's seen as more of an economic asset. So if we take a look at global death rates, so the number of deaths per year per 1,000 people in industrialized nations like the United States, where we have lower death rates compared to underdeveloped countries. We have an aging population. We refer to this as the graying of America, where the fastest growing age population is which one? All right, 85 and older. So it's referred to as the graying of America, living much longer these days. We have a lot of clean water, an abundance of food, plumbing to help remove human waste away from us, advanced medical care. In a lot of undeveloped countries, as mentioned, they're going to have higher death rates, a lack of clean water, lack of food, lack of medical care and medical assistance, and a lack of living in sanitary types of living conditions. So from a global type of perspective, let's take a look at the difference between relative poverty versus absolute poverty. Relative poverty is the kind of poverty that is usually experienced in more industrialized nations like the U.S. and also Western Europe, Australia, and Canada. And this is lacking the funds or the incomes to meet the average standard of living. So if you're living below the average standard of living or living below the poverty line, this is referred to as relative poverty. You may drive older cars, you may live in poorer neighborhoods, buy less expensive food, maybe more processed food. You may be able to receive various types of government assistance such as SNAP or Medicaid, Pell Grants. And so this is the kind of poverty typically experienced here in the U.S., referred to as relative poverty, where globally, if we take a look at third world countries, underdeveloped countries, they have what's called absolute poverty, where they're lacking the funds to meet their basic needs of life, not having enough money for food, clean water, clothing, shelter, and medical care. And for a lot of these people, it's very much a daily struggle. They don't have a lot of the safety nets that we have here in the U.S. in regards for food and shelter and unemployment checks. There's a lot of benefits of living in an industrialized nation. These social programs and safety nets that we all pay into help prevent a lot of Americans from living in absolute poverty, where there's a difference between living and dying on a daily basis. So global hunger is much more widespread than the United States. In the United States, we have a huge overabundance of food, where a lot of food is actually, unfortunately, wasted each day and thrown away. So in the U.S., there are programs like SNAP, formerly known as the Food Stamp Program, WIC, which stands for Women with Infant Children. These are those vouchers that pregnant women and women who have children under the age of 5 can go to various grocery stores and get fruits and vegetables and formula and those types of things, cereal, milk. We have soup kitchens, free or reduced school lunches. But in undeveloped, poorer countries, there's about 800 million people that don't have enough food each day. They're starving. They're going to bed hungry every day. So we have about 25,000 people that die each day from hunger, which equates to around 9 million people that die each year from going hungry. So what do these starving children do? They have a very hard life. So due to this starvation, you have tens of millions of children each day in a lot of these low-income countries begging in the streets, stealing food in order to feed their families and feed themselves, prostituting themselves, unfortunately, as children and also as teenagers, working for drug gangs, doing various things for drug gangs, which can be very, very dangerous, in order just to make a little bit of money in order to feed their families. And these are things that children are doing on a daily basis, things that we really don't see here in the United States at all. It's a foreign concept to many of us. Slavery and sweatshops. Chattel slavery is whenever human beings are bought and sold as slaves. It's called property slavery, also known as chattel slavery. The British Empire ended slavery in 1833. The United States formally abolished slavery in 1865, known as the 13th Amendment. There's approximately 30 million people that are enslaved today globally. It may be chattel slavery, where they are bought and sold into slavery, but also they have what's known as debt slavery, where people that are in debt around the world are going to have to work off that debt, even if it's generational debt. You could have a grandfather that put the family in debt, and then they may later on, many years later, may have their son or their grandson still trying to work off that particular debt. It's called debt slavery. We also have sweatshops globally around the world. There's about 250 million children from the age of 5 to 14 working in these sweatshops. The United States, we did have child labor during the Industrial Revolution, and by the early 1900s they really started to phase that out, and we started to implement child labor laws to get children out of factories, out of coal mines, out of these assembly lines, and getting them back in school. But there's a lot of underdeveloped countries around the world that this is a big part of their economy, and they need a lot of workers out there in order to manufacture and make a lot of the products that are being bought and sold all around the world. A lot of these children and a lot of these people who work in these sweatshops, they make very, very little money, work long hours, very unsafe working conditions. There's not any type of laws to really protect them and make sure that they are taken care of and that their rights are being protected. They're making clothes, they're making toys, electronics, all different types of things that are being bought and sold around the world. And a lot of industrialized nations, even the United States, will purchase a lot of these products that are being made in sweatshops, and they're being brought in, and they're being sold in Walmart and Target and these other types of places. So let's finish up, and we're going to talk about two main types of theories to really kind of explain economic inequality from a couple different perspectives. The first one is called modernization theory. And this is the concept that industrialized nations like the U.S., they aid or benefit undeveloped countries through manufacturing, allowing them to become more modernized, industrialized, and help them rise out of poverty. And it's viewed as being mutually beneficial from one country to the next. And this is something that we've actually seen with China. There's in the 1980s and the 1990s, a lot of American companies and corporations stopped doing a lot of the manufacturing here in the U.S., and they started buying a lot of their goods from China. And so this is during the time period whenever China was very much an undeveloped country. They weren't a very powerful country at all in the 1980s, but they really kind of rose to power during the process of a lot of assembly lines and factories being built over there, these sweatshops being created over there, and the United States and other countries buying a lot of these products. It stimulated the economy in China. And today, because of that, China has the second largest economy in the world, next to the United States. But according to this theory, it's viewed as being mutually beneficial. But there's another way of looking at this as well. It's called the world system theory. And this concept looks at it as like industrialized nations not so much trying to help or benefit undeveloped countries, but really more using and exploiting the cheap labor, these poor countries, as cheap labor, so large companies and corporations can increase their profits. They can increase their overall power. So as a final thought with this chapter, sociology studies how global demographic trends affect natural resources, economic and political development, while on a micro level, how hunger, starvation, child labor, slavery, and sex trafficking impacts the individuals and also the family members that are experiencing that.